The night I discovered a tunnel under my house, I stopped worrying about HOA fines forever. One second, I was standing in my basement staring at a crack in the concrete, wondering why it felt warm against my boots. The next, I was looking straight into a man-made shaft with fresh timber supports, electrical cables, and the kind of expensive equipment nobody accidentally leaves under someone else's foundation. That's when I realized this wasn't negligence. Somebody had deliberately dug beneath my home, and whoever did it had expected me to never find out. My name is Ethan Carter, and until all of this happened, I thought I lived in one of the quietest neighborhoods in northern Colorado. It wasn't perfect, sure. Every subdivision has that one neighbor who measures your grass with their eyes, that one retiree who somehow knows every city ordinance by heart. And of course, our HOA president, except ours wasn't just annoying. Her name was Vanessa Holloway, and if controlling people could be an Olympic sport, she'd have retired with more gold medals than Michael Phelps. She always smiled too much during board meetings, the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She talked about protecting property values while quietly turning neighbors against each other, collecting violations like trophies. I mostly stayed out of her way. I work as a structural engineer. I spend my days solving problems. Then I come home, grill dinner, fix whatever needs fixing around the house, and enjoy the silence. At least, that was the routine before the vibrations started. At first, they were so small, I laughed them off. A screwdriver rolled off my workbench one afternoon. I blamed my old shelves. A week later, a coffee mug rattled across the kitchen counter while every window in the house hummed for maybe 3 seconds. I thought maybe a heavy truck had driven past. Then the basement lights flickered one evening just as I heard what sounded like a distant drilling noise. It wasn't loud. It was deep, almost like hearing thunder through the ground instead of the sky. I called the utility company. They checked nearby lines and shrugged. I hired a plumber. He inspected every pipe in the house, scratched his beard, and told me everything looked fine. My neighbor across the street, an older Marine named Frank Sullivan, joked that maybe I'd built my house on top of an ancient volcano. We laughed about it over beers, but something about the vibrations bothered me more than I admitted. Houses tell stories if you know how to listen. Floors don't shake without a reason. Concrete doesn't crack because it gets bored. Then one Saturday morning I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The crack running across the basement slat had grown nearly an inch overnight. When I knelt down to inspect it, warm air drifted out of the opening. Warm air, underground, in early October. That made absolutely no sense. I grabbed a pry bar and carefully chipped away at the damaged concrete. Every swing echoed differently than it should have. Hollow. I remember stopping for just a second because every instinct I had was telling me to call someone instead of opening it farther. But curiosity has a funny way of overpowering common sense. A few more strikes, another section of concrete broke loose, and suddenly dirt spilled inward instead of outward. I crouched down and shined my flashlight through the opening. My heart nearly stopped. There were wooden support beams no more than 6 feet below my basement floor, fresh lumber, extension cables, ventilation tubing. Somebody had installed portable work lights that were still plugged into a generator humming quietly farther down the tunnel. This wasn't abandoned. This place had been active within hours. Then I saw a heavy plastic crate sitting against the wall. Inside were rolled construction drawings, secured with bright orange straps. I pulled one free and unrolled it across my workbench upstairs. The project title had been blacked out with marker, but whoever tried hiding it missed the logo printed in the corner. Ridgewood Estates Community Association. Our HOA. Beneath it sat the signature authorizing construction, Vanessa Holloway. I must have stared at that page for 10 straight minutes without blinking. Every logical explanation I came up with fell apart before I finished thinking it through. Why would an HOA authorize underground construction beneath private homes? Why hide it? Why never notify homeowners? Before I could answer any of those questions, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA. Subject line: structural concerns regarding your property. I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because the timing was too perfect. According to the email, anonymous complaints had raised concerns that my home's foundation might be unstable, and the board recommended I consider selling before property values declined further. That wasn't a coincidence. That was the first move in a game I hadn't realized we were already playing. Instead of calling the police, I folded the blueprint back into its tube, locked my basement door, shut off every light in the house, and sat alone in the dark thinking about one question that refused to leave my head. If they were willing to dig beneath my home without permission, What exactly were they so desperate to hide? If you want to continue the story, I barely slept that night. Every creak in the walls sounded different once I knew there was empty space beneath my feet. And every vibration made me wonder whether someone was still down there working while I lay in bed pretending my life hadn't just been turned upside down. Around 3 in the morning, I walked back into the basement with a folding chair, turned off my flashlight, and just listened. At first, there was nothing. Then, faintly, I heard metal striking rock, followed by voices too muffled to understand. That was enough. Whoever built that tunnel hadn't abandoned it after I found the entrance. They were still using it. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't calling the police. Not yet. If I reported everything immediately, all they'd find was an empty tunnel because someone would tip Vanessa off before investigators ever arrived. People like her always seemed to know things before everyone else did. I needed proof that couldn't disappear overnight. So I treated my own house like an engineering project. I installed vibration sensors along the basement walls, thermal cameras aimed at the opening I'd carefully covered with plywood, tiny wireless microphones inside the tunnel entrance, and a hidden security camera disguised inside an old electrical junction box. I even calibrated everything using equipment from a consulting project I'd finished a month earlier. If somebody walked through that tunnel, I wanted the exact time, temperature, vibration pattern, and audio recording. Frank noticed my garage door open all afternoon and wandered over carrying 2 iced coffees. Either you're building a spaceship, he said with a grin, or you're planning to bury a body. I smiled without laughing. Honestly, Frank, I wish it were either one. His expression changed immediately. We sat in lawn chairs while I showed him one blueprint, just one. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he quietly set his coffee on the driveway and looked toward my house. Son, he said, I spent 22 years in the Marines. I've seen smug people do stupid things. This is organized. He leaned closer. Don't tell anybody else. I nodded because I already knew he was right. 3 nights later, my cameras finally paid off. At 1047 a.m., 4 workers wearing unmarked safety gear entered the tunnel from somewhere beyond my property. None of them came through my basement. They approached from farther underground. They rolled a portable cart carrying what looked like fiber conduit and sections of steel pipe. About 20 minutes later, another person appeared. Even through grainy infrared footage, I recognized the walk immediately. Vanessa Holloway. She wasn't wearing heels or business clothes. She had on jeans, work boots, and a hard hat with a flashlight mounted across the front. She pointed toward something on the wall, argued briefly with one worker, then unfolded what looked suspiciously like another set of engineering plans. My stomach turned. HOA presidents don't inspect secret tunnels under private homes at 2 in the morning unless they're involved from the beginning. The next day, I drove to the county records office. Most people think property records are boring. Engineers know better. Every buried utility, every easement, every drainage line leaves paperwork somewhere. It took nearly 4 hours before an older clerk named Melissa looked over her glasses and frowned. That's odd. What's odd? I asked. She rotated her monitor toward me. There's no permit for underground infrastructure anywhere near your subdivision during the last 7 years. I pointed at the map. What about the commercial development west of us? She searched again. Same answer. Nothing. No excavation permits. No geotechnical approval. No environmental review. Legally, that tunnel shouldn't exist. That afternoon, something even stranger happened. I received another certified letter from the HOA. This time, they claimed an independent consultant believed my home might present an immediate structural risk to neighboring properties. They requested access within 48 hours for inspection. Independent consultant? I almost laughed. They wanted inside because they were afraid I'd already found the tunnel. Instead of refusing, I emailed back immediately. Absolutely. Thursday at 10 a.m. Looking forward to meeting your inspector. Then I spent the next 2 days preparing the greatest trap I'd ever built. Thursday morning arrived right on schedule. A white SUV pulled into my driveway. Out stepped Vanessa and a man wearing a polo shirt embroidered with Mountain Peak Structural Services. He introduced himself as Brian, nice enough guy, nervous handshake, avoided eye contact. As soon as we reached the basement, Vanessa began talking before anyone could examine anything. Mr. Carter, these cracks appear much worse than expected. If your foundation has shifted this much, condemnation could become necessary. I folded my arms. Interesting, she smiled. I'm afraid this happens. Really? I asked. What usually causes warm air coming through concrete? She froze for maybe half a second. Brian looked confused. Warm air? He repeated. I walked across the basement and removed the plywood covering the opening. Brian nearly dropped his clipboard. Vanessa didn't speak. Neither did I. We simply looked at each other while the entrance to the tunnel sat between us like a witness waiting to testify. Finally, Brian whispered, "What? What is that?" Vanessa answered before I could. "Probably an abandoned utility corridor." I shook my head slowly. "Funny. Utilities usually don't include generators, fresh timber, ventilation systems, and blueprints signed by HOA presidents." Her face lost every trace of color. Brian turned toward her so quickly I thought he'd pull a muscle. "Vanessa, was he talking about?" She didn't answer him. She answered me instead. "Mr. Carter, I strongly suggest you stop making accusations you can't prove." I smiled for the first time in days. "Who said I can't?" Her eyes narrowed. She understood immediately. I had evidence. She just didn't know how much. They left less than 5 minutes later. Brian looked genuinely shaken climbing into his SUV. Vanessa never looked back. That evening, every camera around my property captured unusual activity. 2 pickup trucks circled the block repeatedly. Someone parked across the street for nearly an hour without getting out. Around midnight, 2 figures entered the tunnel carrying large duffel bags. They weren't installing equipment anymore. They were removing it. Exactly what I'd expected, but they were too late. Everything had already been recorded. Over the next week, I followed the tunnel's path using ground-penetrating radar borrowed from an engineering firm whose owner owed me a favor. The results were unbelievable. The tunnel didn't stop beneath my property. It stretched nearly a quarter-mile toward a luxury housing project still under construction beyond the neighborhood. Then everything suddenly made sense. That development had been delayed for almost 2 years because county regulators refused to approve new underground utility crossings through protected wetlands. Building legally would have cost millions and taken another 18 months. So somebody had decided to tunnel secretly beneath existing private lots instead, bypassing inspections entirely. My house wasn't the destination. It was simply the easiest route. They had gambled that no homeowner would ever notice a few vibrations, but they hadn't counted on one inconvenient detail. I understood foundations better than almost anyone in town, and the deeper I dug into financial records, contractor invoices, and public documents, the uglier the story became. Shell companies connected to HOA board members had received consulting payments. Landscaping contractors suddenly owned excavation equipment. Meeting minutes approving mysterious community infrastructure improvements contained signatures from people who had already moved away months earlier. Somebody wasn't just breaking the law. They had built an entire machine designed to hide it. I knew then that exposing a tunnel wouldn't be enough. If I wanted justice, I have to bring down everything connected to it. Every fake contract, every forged signature, every backroom deal, and every smiling speech Vanessa had ever given about protecting the neighborhood. The tunnel beneath my house was only the entrance. The real underground network wasn't made of concrete and dirt. It was made of lies. And I'd finally found the first loose brick. The moment I believed I had enough evidence, I stopped acting like a homeowner and started thinking like an engineer preparing a failure analysis. Structures don't collapse because of one crack. They collapse because dozens of small failures connect at exactly the wrong moment. Vanessa's operation was no different. Instead of confronting her again, I delivered everything at once. My attorney sent encrypted copies of the recordings, thermal data, structural reports, county records, and financial documents to the district attorney, the county building department, the state licensing board, and 2 investigative reporters who specialized in public corruption. If one office somehow misplaced the evidence, 6 others already had it. 3 days later, I woke up to flashing lights outside my window. Only this time, they weren't there for me. County inspectors had sealed off the luxury development. Sheriff's deputies blocked every entrance while engineers in bright orange vests walked across the neighborhood carrying survey equipment. By noon, television news helicopters were circling overhead. I stood quietly at the end of my driveway beside Frank, neither of us saying much as black SUVs pulled into the HOA office parking lot. Vanessa arrived 20 minutes later wearing the same confident smile she always brought to board meetings. It lasted less than 10 seconds. An investigator handed her a folder. Another asked for her phone, and a deputy politely informed her that the building was now part of an active criminal investigation. Even from across the street, I could see the color drain from her face. She looked around as if someone might rescue her, but the people she'd spent years intimidating suddenly couldn't look her in the eye. Board members who had once applauded every speech quietly slipped out the back door, hoping nobody with a camera recognized them. They were too late. Reporters already had copies of the contracts, the forged meeting minutes, and the payment trail connecting shell companies to HOA directors. Within a week, the entire story exploded across local news. The secret tunnel became only the headline. The investigation uncovered bid rigging, fraudulent assessments, forged resident votes, undisclosed contractor kickbacks, and years of financial manipulation hidden behind language about community improvements. The luxury development lost its permits indefinitely. Contractors sued each other. Insurance companies denied coverage because the excavation had never been legally approved. Several board members hired separate attorneys and immediately began blaming one another. Vanessa tried the same strategy during her deposition. According to her, she had simply trusted consultants and signed paperwork without understanding it. Unfortunately for her, my cameras had captured her walking through that tunnel at nearly 2 in the morning while pointing at construction plans herself. It is remarkably difficult to convince a jury you knew nothing about a project after they watch you personally inspecting it underground. The civil case took nearly a year to finish, but the ending was strangely quiet. There was no dramatic shouting in a courtroom, no movie-style confession, no perfect speech about justice, just signatures on settlement papers, court orders requiring massive repairs, criminal charges against several individuals, and enough compensation to completely stabilize my home's foundation without costing me another dollar. One afternoon, months after everything ended, I walked back into my basement. Fresh concrete covered the opening where the tunnel had once been. New support piers reinforced the foundation, and for the first time in almost a year there was complete silence. No humming beneath my feet, no mysterious vibrations, no wondering what was happening below me while I slept. Frank stopped by carrying 2 cold beers like he always did. He looked around the basement, smiled, and said, "Feels solid again." I nodded. "Yeah, it finally does." We stood there for another minute before he laughed and added, "You know, when this all started, I really thought you were overreacting about a cracked floor." I laughed too. Honestly, so did I. Looking back now, I think that's the part that still stays with me. Not the investigation, not the lawsuits, not even the tunnel itself. It's how easy it is to ignore small warnings because they're inconvenient. One strange vibration, one crack in the floor, one letter from an HOA that feels just a little too perfectly timed. Individually, they seem harmless. Together, they tell a story most people never stop long enough to hear. I still live in the same house today, and every now and then, someone driving through the neighborhood slows down to look at it because they've heard the story. They usually expect to see the place where a tunnel destroyed someone's life. Instead, they see an ordinary home with a repaired foundation and a guy mowing his lawn on Saturday mornings. Maybe that's the best ending I could have asked for. The house stayed. The people who tried to build their future beneath someone else's home didn't. But I'll leave you with one question, because I've gone back and forth on it more times than I can count. If I had called the police the very first night instead of quietly gathering evidence for weeks, would justice have happened faster? Or would the people responsible have erased everything before anyone believed me? I'd really like to hear what you think. If you were in my position, would you have exposed the tunnel immediately? Or would you have played the long game the way I did? Share your thoughts in the comments because I'm genuinely curious where you draw the line between caution and revenge. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes the biggest problem an HOA can cause is an ugly mailbox. Sometimes the real danger is buried much deeper than anyone imagines.